Deb told you a little bit about what my company does. People always get disappointed if I don't bring pictures, so I brought a couple pictures of myself at the White House. So in that picture, I'm 7 months pregnant with Maeve, and there's my two sons, my husband, and that was our kind of going away meeting with President Bush. So he asked me to bring the family up so we could spend some time with him. And you would have thought he had nothing more important to do that day than to thank my boys for my service and to thank my husband for my service. And so regardless of who's president, you always see things in the press or on TV, and you see whatever the media portrays. But I saw a person who was a very faith-based and very family-focused person. One of the things that I had responsibility for, besides serving the 3,000 staff at the White House, the president and the vice president, is we also had all of the moving and remote location technology as well. So Air Force One, Marine One, which is the helicopters, undisclosed locations around the globe, Camp David, things like that. We also have responsibility for those technologies. So that's a picture of me. I was on Air Force Two, and I got a chance to go on the European delegation with the president, and we were also upgrading technology at the time. And then I went through a capabilities exercise with Special Forces. And so we were actually taken prisoner and taught how to handle being a hostage. We went through a rescue, and then they taught us how to shoot sniper pistols and rifles, which I decided I missed my calling because I really liked it a lot. And then we jumped in helicopters and had a really good time. I really do believe that in order to protect the nation, that I've got to get the message out on a personal level, because you have families, you have friends, you go to work. And if I can get the message out on a personal level how to protect yourself, you're going to protect your devices, and in effect, we're going to be able to protect the United States better. And one of the things that's interesting is, so Deb mentioned I've got a book coming out, and my co-author is a lawyer, and he's known for intellectual property and privacy law. And we talk about sort of the early days of the internet. Now, I was just a kid then, but Ted was already working. So, and he talked about how people would call and they would say they're holding the internet hostage and they wanted free ice cream in return. And we didn't know how good we had it back then, if that was all it was all about, right? So now people don't call us and tell us they've taken pieces of the internet hostage. They just have it, and they're doing bad things with it. Antivirus and anti-malware only catches 1/3 to 1/4 of all the bad stuff that's out there, because it has to know it exists. It's kind of like the early days of vaccines. Unfortunately, people had to die before we could figure out the vaccine. We're kind of in its infancy as well on antivirus and anti-malware. It's somebody had to have an infected device or computer, report it so that we could update the software to protect you. It's not just about computers anymore. So every time you go online, there's sort of this perception that phones are safer or tablets are safer because you're not hearing as much about those getting infected with a virus. And what I tell people is, no. It's just that criminals go where the action is. And it used to be the critical mass of devices talking to the internet up until about a year ago were computers. So that's where the action was. That's where criminals focus their attention. Now that you see the hockey stick on tablets and smartphones, they are moving towards the tablets and smartphones. And guess what? The computers are actually a little more safer than, and you were doing more on the computers, right? And now you're doing more on the tablets and the smartphones. So get ready. That attack vector, all it's doing is just shifting. It's kind of like, kind of how sometimes crime will sort of move from neighborhood to neighborhood. It's really kind of that, what's going on there. And the other piece too is these different forms of identity theft. And we're going to talk about some of those different forms of identity theft that are happening. But one example I can give you is I actually interviewed a victim for the book. And she's a very nice young lady in Indiana. She's a college student, and she gave me permission. I helped her try and figure out what to do. She figured out that somebody on the internet for about 5 years had been scraping pictures of her off Facebook and creating alternate identities using her pictures of her friends and her family and different names. And she would kind of like follow some of the posts this young lady would have and sort of have this like parallel life, and was basically impersonating her but using a different name. The laws have not caught up, guys. So I was out there trying to help her figure out what her rights were, what types of things she should file at a state level, at a federal level. there are prosecutors working on it now, so I can't get into all the details of her case, but a very twisted form of internet identity. I mean, how would you like it if you found your likeness of you being used without your permission to promote something maybe you don't believe in, or doing activities that you don't believe in, and now somebody has facial recognition of you participating in activities you don't believe in? So it's more than just kind of what's going on with our bank accounts, right, and our personal data. It's also our actual image of who we are. So I like to give people practical information. So how many of you have ever felt like you had, like, somebody is definitely in my cell phone, it is not behaving? Have you ever had that, like the cell phone was just not behaving? And so a lot of times people think, well, maybe it just needs a reboot, or I just need a new phone. And I have had a couple of people ask me, could it be hijacked? And my answer is, well, maybe. And the reason being is there were actually, last year was the first year we really start seeing the viruses taking off for smartphones. So 30 viruses a month were targeted just at smartphones last year. And we expect that to go up again this year. The other thing that's going on with the smartphones is there's such a demand for these apps, and getting the apps out there as quickly as possible in the phone stores. You know, so you go, if you've got an Apple phone, you've got your app store. If you're a Droid user, right, you've got your official store you go to. Now, I don't know about you, but don't you expect if it's for sale there that it's been fully vetted? Don't you expect that? Like if you go to the store and you go to the Droid store and you download an app that somebody's looked at it, guess what, folks? So they've done sort of the basic checks. But actually, rogue banking apps made it into the stores. People downloaded them and used them and lost their credentials. Now, thankfully, it was stopped before money was stolen for good. But they've also had other rogue apps out there, which are out there looking at your data and your information while people are playing free games. So that's, you know, kind of the types of things you need to watch out for when you're actually on your smartphone. What I tell people is, before you get ready to download an app, you know how you can actually see the rating and then you can read people's reviews? Take it outside of the App Store, go online and do your own research on these companies. So for example, if you were to research Angry Birds, how many people here like to play Angry Birds? Yeah, I see you people on the planes. You're all playing Angry Birds. As soon as they say your electronic devices can get turned back on, boom, you can hear that the theme music going for Angry Birds. Well, if you went out of the App Store and went online and started searching about Rovio and Angry Birds, you would learn that one of the things they're doing is they're actually taking data about you in the background while you're playing Angry Birds. So they're taking things like location data. There was a time that they were actually looking at your phone book and just kind of storing that for a little while. It's all in the privacy agreement, you know, that little 8-point font that you clicked OK to because you wanted to get to the game. So these are the kinds of things you just need to sort of kind of pay attention to and do a little bit of research. It's your phone, it's your life, it's your data. And if you just take a little bit of time to do that research, you'll be armed with enough information to decide, you know what, I don't care if they look at my phone book. I want to throw pigs at eggs, right? So there was a study done. So I like to think people are honest and good people. But Symantec is making me kind of wonder how naive I am. They did a study where they left 50 lost smartphones. So they just sort of left them, you know, hanging around. And then they sort of saw what people did, strangers who saw the phone. They picked them up, they turned them on, saw there wasn't a password, looked at their email, looked at Facebook, looked at banking, anything that was automatically logged in, you know, all the different apps. So what's interesting is a lot of people don't put a lock on their cell phone. They don't have a password lock. They don't do an auto lock on their phone. And so when you lose your phone in the cab, or those of you who have businesses, when an employee loses that phone, first of all, what data is on there? The password protection isn't going to stop the really crafty people, but it is going to stop nosy people. And so I try to give people a few things to think about, just 4 steps to think about when you have your smartphone. So always lock it. I always say always block it. So think about before you download an app. For example, online banking. Do not just go to the App Store and download it. Go to your banking website. Go to your investment firm's website if they've got any online apps, and read about it first so you know what you're downloading when you go to the App Store. Protect You can protect your phone by setting a password that it can't download anything without you knowing about it. That's really important. And then the last is never assume that your voice calls are private. I mean, besides the fact that, you know, people think they're in a bubble and they're not, you know, they're talking too loud and you get the TMI thing going on. But especially when you're traveling overseas, in countries where the government owns the cellular companies and where the government owns the broadband, just assume anything you do on the internet or over your cellular phones could be listened to. That's a rule of thumb I just tell you to sort of tuck away in here. So over 8 million Americans were victims of identity theft in 2010. I mean, that's just staggering. And a new study just came out by Javelin. They do a study every single year. And they're predicting what the 3 big culprits will be for this year. And so their prediction is it's going to be data breaches at companies that have your data. For example, Sony PlayStation. For example, you know, other kind of miscellaneous companies. Anybody here shop at Zappos? They had a breach. Then the next is going to be social networking. You'd be surprised how much people give up on social networking that then in turn the bad guys can use to guess things about you. So by looking at it, they can use things like where you grew up to maybe guess your password or where you went to college. They can look at things to just try and take over your identity or fool other people into giving information about you. And then the last is the mobile devices. So we already talked a lot about the mobile devices because I know those are really popular. The other piece that's happening on social networking is it's really interesting how they're sort of changing their attacks. So it used to be kind of ridiculous, right? I mean, you'd see some stuff post on Facebook and you're like, that is so obviously a scam, like I would never click on that. Well, now they're taking advantage of the chat feature. And so now this one victim I talked to, this pop-up window pops up and it's a chat from her sister. And her sister said, hey, I know you're thinking about refinancing the house. You should click here. I just talked to this guy. He can help you. So the sister's like, oh, this is cool, clicks on it, and she's out $6,000, total scam. What had happened was somebody had hijacked her sister's Facebook account and was chatting with her sister via Facebook, got her to click on a link, and it all looked totally legitimate. And $6,000 later, no refinance. So those are the types of things I always say to people, trust but verify. Again, we're so busy. And she's like, well, there's my sister's picture, and she's on Facebook, and I'm on Facebook, and I was refinancing. How'd they know? Just an easy guess. So I always say to people, trust but verify. Pick up that phone and call sis. What is this thing you sent me? Before you click on the link. Just a couple things, because I find I get the emails all the time on identity theft, and can you please help me? Real quickly, you know, you file a police report and people go, are you kidding? They're too busy doing other stuff. They don't want a police report. Yeah, they do. You might need it. You might need it for insurance purposes. You might be part of a big ID theft ring. You never know. You do need to do the police report. Go to a clean computer and change all passwords. So if you're not really sure how you got compromised and how you got their identity, the last place I want you to go change all your passwords is on your computer, which might be the one that's infected that started it, because now they're going to have all your new passwords. Then the next thing I want you to do is make sure your bank, your credit card companies, your investment managers, they know this happened to you because they can flag your accounts and they can make sure that if things just don't look right, that you're being taken care of. Get a freeze on all 3 of the credit reports, and then once you've done all that, then scan your home and work computers for viruses. I want you to change your passwords first thing and get everything notified and everything in order, and then clean the computers. And then lastly, there is no shame in telling everybody that you got hacked or identity theft. Make sure they know, because if they're trying to take over your identity, they might be tricking sis into refinancing her home and clicking on a link. So you want to make sure everybody that you care about knows this happened to you. You know, what if you have things like McAfee installed on your computer? Wouldn't that prevent something like this happening? And the answer is it might 1/3 of the time. So that's the challenge. I always say to people, you armed with this knowledge, you are your best defense. A couple of things on if somebody takes over an email account here, just one thing to remember is if they do take over the account and trick people out of their money, besides that police report, you should, to benefit everybody else, file a report with ftc.gov, because they will track these guys down and prosecute them. Somebody takes over your email account, you want to make sure you let everybody know you changed all your passwords. You want to check and make sure they're not forwarding your email to their other accounts so they're still getting your emails. And then notify your email account provider, because again, you may be helping them bust a ring that's a professional ring that's doing this. At some point, you may have to consider, because sometimes you could just never get the hijacker out of your email account, you may have to change your email account. For those of you who might have kind of kids, grandkids, or if you're very active on social media, I always tell people you want to make sure that your personal billboard, which is your brand today, HR asking for your ID and password to Facebook, which is ridiculous, but that does mean they're checking Facebook. So, you know, do you want them to see you dressed up as Lady Gaga in a meat dress? Do you want them to see you with a tray of beer? Or do you want them to see you as, you know, somebody who's serious about what you're doing? So I always tell people, just kind of think about the person that you want people to see, because digital is so one-dimensional, and you post something in anger or in sadness or something goofy, and it's out there. I mean, even if you can't see it, it's still out there. And then just a couple of the headlines. And I actually disagree with some of these official stats. So as we are teaching the kids, one of the questions I'll ask the kids is, so, you know, do you have ground rules at home? And of course they do. Don't talk to strangers online and whatever. And I'll say, okay, so everybody you're friends with on Facebook, you've actually met them all in person and you know them all. Like, you go to school with them all, and a couple of them will go, yeah, yeah. And I'm like, so you've never gotten a friend request from a friend of yours on Facebook, and since they were a friend of your friend that you've accepted, you've never done that? Oh, well, no, I have. I mean, they're a friend of my friend. I'm like, well, that's a stranger. And they're like, well, they're friends with my friend. And I said, no. Did you meet them? Did your parents meet them? No. And I said, well, how do you know they didn't have a friend of a friend introduce them to that friend? How do you know they know them? You don't know that. That's a stranger. And so you have to understand this paradigm is so different for them. So if you're, you know, think about it, and Google's done a good job with this, because they actually call it circles, right? Google Plus is in circles, unlike Facebook. And so you actually could say, well, gosh, I'm friends with Deb, so naturally, sure, if you guys send me friend requests, I'm going to accept it. But I don't really know you. And then you were in that person's friend request, and the next thing you know, I'm friends with everybody in the room, but I hadn't met anybody. So that's one of the things that, you know, I kind of point out to you, that they've got a different perspective of, yeah, I know that person. I mean, I had to really dig deep to get them to kind of go, oh. Then the other thing they talked about is, they're like, oh, my parents don't have a clue what I do online. I have my ground rules, but I go do my thing, and they tell me they check it, but I know they're busy and they don't check it. So I'm just saying. And then here's the first lady, and she's got 2 daughters, so she's dealing with this herself, right? Whether or not this is the right thing to do to have her daughters online. And she said, you know what, I don't think they need to be. Something that's really interesting, so last year, my middle school kids, pretty consistently across the different schools and stuff, they were all on Facebook, really active, very active at texting. This year, I'm working with a 6th grade class, and their attitude is, we think Facebook's dumb. We don't get the point. So I'm not sure if it's like losing its edge, or just, I'm not sure, you know, just a different class of kids, but they're like, we think it's dumb. Nothing good happens on Facebook. I'm like, this is interesting. So, but you know, I just say it's kind of one of those things that we need to remind ourselves first. We are the best example to the next generation. So digital is forever. And I actually make the kids repeat after me. I have this little mantra. I'm like, even if I delete it, and even if I don't see it, it's forever. Because somebody can cut and paste, and you know, it just goes viral. I also say, and this is great for adults, grandmom and bad guy rule. Okay, so grandmom, if you're getting ready to post anything in an email, forwarding a joke, a picture, and you wouldn't want your grandmom to see you doing it, don't do it online. Take it offline. Probably don't do it at all, but definitely don't do it online. And then the bad guy rule. So I always tell people, look at yourself as a bad guy trying to take advantage. I do have a book. It's in ebook form and paperback, and like a harder cover paperback form. And my co-author and I, Ted Claypool, we wrote it as a guide for consumers and for techies who hate taking questions. They can just hand them our book. So we wrote it as sort of a step-by-step guide for people to follow. And I hope I gave you a few things, a few tips that you can take home and use right away. Thank you.